My parents are inadequate because of their abuse. I ran away from them as a child, and when they tried to take over my agency and hurt me for refusing, they destroyed it. So I took them to court. I never expected to be writing this, but life has been crazy, and I need to get it off my chest. I'm not sure what I'm looking for: advice, support, or simply a place to scream into the void. But here I am, putting everything out there. I grew up in a tiny town. You know, the kind of place where everyone knows each other's business. If you step out of line, people will talk about it for years. From the outside, it appeared peaceful. Nice houses with neat yards, kids were playing in the streets, and neighbors waved from across the street. But inside my house, the story was completely different. My parents, Rick and Janet, were anything but affectionate. Rick was the type of man who worked hard, drank harder, and vented his frustrations on those around him. He was built like a bear, tall and heavy, with fists that appeared to be made for breaking things, which he excelled at. When I was younger, I'd hear him yelling at my mother, occasionally throwing objects and slamming doors. Janet wasn't doing much better. She did not physically abuse me, but her words cut deeper than any punch could. "You are useless. You are aware of this. You will never amount to anything. Exactly like your father." She'd usually say this while nursing a cigarette in the kitchen and staring out the window, as if she wished she could disappear. She never stated it outright, but I knew she regretted having children. I could see it in the way she addressed my siblings and me. She avoided showing any affection. My younger brother, David, tried to stay out of her way. In that regard, he outperformed me. He knew not to poke the bear. My sister Hannah was too young to understand, but I did my best to keep her safe from the worst of it. The hardest part was knowing that none of this was normal, but there was no way out. School was my only escape. Even so, things didn't improve significantly. I was not popular, far from it. I was quiet, the student who sat in the back of the classroom and tried not to be noticed. I did not have many friends. Most of the kids in my town had equally bad parents as mine. However, they put on a better performance in public. There was one kid, Jared, who used to constantly pick on me. It started small, with teasing and name-calling. But as we got older, things got worse. By middle school, Jared had a large group of friends who thought it was hilarious to torment me. They'd shove me down the halls, call me names, and Jared once slammed my locker shut on my hand. I remember looking at my swollen fingers and feeling nothing but rage. But I didn't do anything because I couldn't. If I fought back, things would only get worse. And I knew it. At home, things weren't much better. My father was always angry. Even the smallest things would set him off. Maybe I didn't clean the yard to his liking. Perhaps dinner wasn't hot enough when he arrived home from work. Whatever it was, he would find an excuse to yell. And if he was drunk, which he usually was, he'd do more than just yell. I quickly learned to stay out of his way, keep my head down, and avoid provoking him. When I was about 14, he had a major meltdown. I quote, get home late from school because I stayed behind to assist a teacher with something. I knew I was going to get it the moment I walked through the door and saw him sitting in his chair, nursing a beer with that cold expression in his eyes. "Where the hell have you been?" He let out a growl. "I was in school." Before I could finish, he was up, looming over me. "Do not lie to me, boy. Do you think I am unaware of what you have been up to?" I am not lying. I swear I never got to finish the sentence because he pushed me hard against the wall. I felt my head slam into the plaster, and everything went blurry for a moment. Next thing I knew, his hand was squeezing my throat. He was not trying to choke me. Not really, but he intended to scare me. And it worked. "Do you ever come home late again? I will break your neck, do you hear me?" His breath stank of alcohol, and his grip tightened just enough to convince me he would. I nodded. My eyes sting with tears, and he lets go. I stumbled back, gasping for air, and he simply turned around and returned to his chair as if nothing had happened. My mother was in the kitchen the entire time, pretending not to see. That is how it has always been. She turned a blind eye, let him do whatever he wanted, and then she'd blame me for provoking him. I believe that was the night I realized I needed to get out. I wasn't sure how, but I knew I couldn't stay there. I couldn't live the rest of my life trapped in that house under my father's control. Every day I was reminded of my own worthlessness. High school passed quickly. I didn't bother making friends. What was the point? I knew I wouldn't be in touch with anyone after graduation, and I didn't want to explain my family situation to anyone. So I kept my head down, studied enough to pass, and numbered the days until I could leave. There was one thing that kept me going, however. Mrs. Klein is a teacher. She was my English teacher, and she noticed something in me that no one else did. She was the first person to tell me I was smart and had potential. I didn't believe her at first, but she continued to encourage and push me to do better. She would give me books to read outside of class that were not part of the curriculum, and we would discuss them after school. You do not belong here. She once told me, "You are better than this place. Do not let anyone tell you otherwise." Her words stayed with me. She convinced me that just maybe I could have a future outside of that hellhole, but I knew it wouldn't be easy. My parents had no intention of helping me pay for college, and I couldn't afford it on my own. So I began working. I took a part-time job at a local grocery store, bagging groceries and stocking shelves. It wasn't much, but it was enough to put aside a little money. When senior year rolled around, I began applying to colleges. I didn't mind where I went as long as it was far away. I applied to a few out-of-state schools, knowing it was a long shot but worth a try. I did not tell my parents about it. I knew they wouldn't mind, and if anything, they tried to keep me from going. I remember the day I received my acceptance letter. I'd been accepted at a university about 6 hours away. Not exactly. Across the country, but far enough that I wouldn't have to visit my parents every day. I was ecstatic, but I knew I needed to keep it quiet. I hid the letter in my room under a stack of old school papers and didn't say anything to anyone. The last thing I needed was for my father to find out and ruin things for me. Graduation was a quiet affair. My parents did not bother showing up, which was fine with me. I didn't want them around anyway. I took my diploma and walked out of that school, knowing I would never return. When it came time to leave for college, I packed my belongings in the middle of the night and left without saying goodbye. My parents didn't realize I was gone until the next morning. By then, I had already set out on my journey to a better life. It was an adjustment, to say the least. For the first time in my life, I was free, but I had no idea what to do with that freedom. I was not accustomed to having control over my own life. It was overwhelming. But I did make some friends, which helped. Aaron is the first person I met. He was my roommate, and we hit it off immediately. He was the complete opposite of me, outgoing, confident, and always looking for a good time. Aaron helped me come out of my shell in ways I never thought possible. I met Emily, Carlos, and Sarah. Emily was tough, no nonsense, had a sharp wit, and was fiercely loyal to her friends. She had her own issues with her parents, and we connected over them. Carlos was a quiet guy who never said much, but always had your back when it counted. And Sarah, well, Sarah was a wild card. She was impulsive, reckless, and always seeking the next thrill. She was the type of person who could persuade you to try something crazy, and before you knew it, you were halfway through. We formed a close bond as a group of 4. We partied, studied, and relied on one another when things got tough. College was not the escape I had hoped for. I was still struggling with my past. I am still haunted by my parents' voices telling me I was not good enough. But having my friends around made things easier. They didn't know everything about my life, but they were never judgmental about it. The years went by faster than I expected. Before I knew it, graduation was approaching, and I had no idea what I was going to do next. Aaron, being the dreamer he was, had the crazy idea that we should all move to a new city together and start over. At first, I laughed it off. It sounded ridiculous at first, but as I thought about it, it made more sense. I wasn't prepared to face the real world yet. I didn't want to return home, and I wasn't sure I could handle it on my own. But with my friends by my side, perhaps I could. Perhaps this was my opportunity to finally break free from the bonds of my past. 2 weeks after graduation, we packed our belongings into 2 cars and hit the road. We did not have a specific destination in mind. We just had a vague idea that we wanted to go somewhere new, somewhere far removed from everything we had ever known. We drove for several days, stopping in random towns along the way, sleeping in cheap motels and eating at diners that appeared to have remained unchanged since the 1950s. It seemed like an adventure. We were running towards something, but we didn't know what it was. Eventually, we arrived in a city on the opposite side of the country. It wasn't the biggest city, but it was big enough for us to fit in and start over. We found a tiny apartment. The four of us packed into 2 bedrooms and began looking for work. It was not easy. We had no connections, no money, and no clear plan. But somehow, we made it work. Aaron landed a job at a bar. Emily found work as a waitress, while Carlos began working for a local construction company. I bounced around from job to job, never quite finding my footing. But I didn't mind. I was free for the first time in my life. I was not living in fear. The city became our home. We worked during the day and explored at night. We'd go out to bars, meet new people, and try to forget about our past experiences. But no matter how far I ran, I couldn't shake the shadows of my childhood. I lie awake at night, haunted by memories of my father's rage, my mother's cold indifference, and the unending sense that I wasn't good enough. One night, after a particularly long shift at the cafe where I worked, I sat on the roof of our apartment building, looking out at the city lights. Aaron joined me a few minutes later, holding a beer. Do you ever feel like we're still running? I asked, without looking at him. Aaron took a long sip of his beer before responding. Yes, man, but that's life, right? We're all running from something. I nodded, knowing he was correct. We were all running, but what were we running towards? It's been several years since we first moved to the city. We all settled into our own routines, but the bond between the four of us remains strong. We've made new friends, found new jobs, and started planning our future. But the past is never far away. Hello, Reddit. I'm back again. If you read my last post, you will know that I have been through a lot. I thought the hardest part of my life was over when I ran away from my childhood and started over with my friends in the city. It turns out that was only the beginning. Following the move. It was difficult for all of us. We were barely making ends meet, jumping from one job to the next in order to pay our rent each month. We felt like we were playing a never-ending game of survival. And for a while, we were fine with it. I mean, anything beats returning to the hell we left behind. Survival mode, however, proved insufficient after a while. We needed more. I needed more. I still remember the night everything changed. We were sitting in our cramped apartment after another long day of dead-end work. Aaron had just finished his shift at the bar. Emily was exhausted after waiting tables. Carlos was nursing a back injury from the construction site, while I was exhausted from working at yet another cafe. We were all sitting at the table, eating cheap takeout. Aaron looked up with a gleam in his eyes. "Why are we doing this?" he asked, leaning back in his chair and smirking. I frowned, unable to understand his point. What do you mean? Why are we breaking our backs working for someone else when we can work for ourselves? Carlos raised his brow, skeptical. You got some plan we don't know about? Aaron leaned forward, his smirk turning into a smile. I have been thinking about it. We have skills. We have connections. Why not start our own thing? We could create something from the ground up. We are smarter than half of the idiots who make money. So, why not us? At first, I thought he was insane. I mean, none of us had any actual business experience. Yes, we were good at what we did, but starting a business was something that others did. People with money have horses and, real experience, but Aaron was not one to give up easily. And soon enough, he had us all hooked on the concept. It took a few weeks of late-night brainstorming sessions, research, and a lot of convincing, but we finally decided to go for it. The plan was simple at first. We'd start a small event management company. We had already established some contacts through our various jobs. Aaron knew a lot of people from the bar and nightlife scene. Emily had worked with a few catering companies, and Carlos had connections through his construction work for venues and other setups. I, on the other hand, had developed some relationships with local vendors during my time in cafes with the four of us. We figured we had enough to give it a try. We scraped together our small savings and took the plunge. We began by managing local events, weddings, and small corporate parties, whatever we could get our hands on. It started off rough. We had no idea what we were doing half of the time, and there were plenty of times when we felt like we had made a huge mistake, but we managed to make it work. Our first real break occurred around 6 months in dot. We were managing a small wedding for a local couple when one of the guests approached us after the event. He introduced himself as Robert King, a mid-level executive at a marketing firm, and expressed satisfaction with how we handled the event. He asked if we had ever considered managing corporate events. I remember feeling a strange combination of excitement and fear. Corporate events. That was an entirely different ballgame. But Aaron, of course, was already nodding as if we were experienced professionals. Absolutely. We've previously handled a few corporate gigs. He lied smoothly. We'd love to talk about working with your company. The rest of us exchanged nervous glances, but we believed Aaron. He was always able to talk his way into and out of any situation. Robert handed us his card, and a week later, we were sitting in a conference room at his company, pitching ourselves as the best event management company in town. By the grace of whatever gods were watching over us, we landed the job. The first corporate event was a disaster behind the scenes. We were running around like chickens with our heads cut off, ensuring that everything ran smoothly. There were a few close calls, such as when the caterer arrived late and Aaron had to sweet-talk the guests into not noticing, or when the heavy equipment failed and Carlos had to MacGyver a solution at the last minute. But by some miracle, the event was a success. And that's when things began to take off. Word spread. We quickly found ourselves with more clients than we could handle. We hired a few more people to help with the workload, and within a year, we'd progressed from managing small weddings to managing large corporate events for some of the city's biggest companies. We were making more money than we could have ever imagined. It seemed like we were unstoppable. Our ambition grew alongside the company's rapid expansion. We weren't satisfied with simply managing events anymore. We wanted more. Aaron, always the visionary, began discussing expanding into other areas such as marketing, public relations, and even venue ownership. The rest of us were skeptical at first, but Aaron, as usual, had a way of convincing us. By year 2, we had expanded into marketing and public relations. We hired a few industry experts to help us navigate the unfamiliar territory, and before we knew it, we were managing not only events, but entire marketing campaigns for our clients. It was wild. We were now playing in the big leagues, rubbing shoulders with CEOs and other high-level executives. It felt surreal, as if we had tricked the universe into allowing us to succeed. However, as with all good things, success was not without its challenges. First, there was the question of money. We were producing a lot, but we weren't particularly good at managing it. We were still new to running a business, and there were several occasions when we came dangerously close to losing everything because we hadn't budgeted properly. Aaron, who had always been the driving force behind our expansion, began taking more risks, some of which paid off, but others nearly sank us. Then there was the question of trust. We were all great friends. Sure, but running a business together had strained our relationships. There were a lot of arguments. Emily and Aaron frequently disagreed on the direction of the company. She preferred to play it safe, to grow gradually and steadily. Aaron, on the other hand, was constantly asking for more, always searching for the next big thing. Carlos and I were usually stuck in the middle, attempting to mediate, which wasn't always easy. One of the most heated disagreements we had occurred after we decided to purchase our first venue. Aaron had discovered an old, run-down warehouse in the heart of the city that he believed could be transformed into a trendy event space. What's the problem? It was going to cost a fortune, and we didn't have much money to spare. We cannot afford this. Emily mentioned that one night as we sat around the table going over the numbers, Aaron leaned back in his chair with a confident smirk on his face. We cannot afford not to do this. Think about it. We own the venue. We wouldn't have to rely on someone else's space. We could host events, rent it out, and even use it as a nightclub on weekends. It is a gold mine. Carlos, who had been silent until that point, spoke up. What if it doesn't work out? What if we can't get the permits or the renovation costs more than we expected? Aaron waved his hand dismissively. It will work out. It always does. I wasn't sure, but I knew Aaron well enough to know that once he made up his mind about something, there was no changing it. So, we did it. We bought the warehouse, spent every penny we had on renovations, and prayed that it would pay off. For a while, it appeared that it would not happen. The renovations took longer than expected, and the costs kept rising. There were days when I thought we were going to lose everything, but we managed to pull it off. The venue, which we dubbed the Vault, opened 6 months later and was an instant success. The Vault quickly became one of the city's most popular gathering spots. We hosted everything from corporate galas to underground raves, and the money started coming in. It felt like we'd hit the jackpot, but success brought new challenges. The first major surprise, which we were not expecting, came when we discovered that one of our top employees, Jake, had been embezzling company funds. Jake had been with us since the beginning, one of the first people we hired, and we completely trusted him. But it turned out he had been skimming money from our profits for months, funneling it into a secret account. I'll never forget the moment we discovered I was reviewing the books one night. Something I rarely did because Aaron usually handled that aspect of things. When I first noticed some discrepancies, I assumed they were due to an error. But the more I looked, the more I realized something was very wrong. I called Aaron, and we spent the next few hours going over everything, figuring out where the money was going. When we eventually confronted Jake, he denied it. At first, but the evidence proved overwhelming. He had stolen almost $100,000 from us. The betrayal stings. We trusted Jake like family, and he had betrayed us. We filed charges, of course, but the damage had been done. It shook our faith in the people we worked with and put a strain on our relationships. Aaron blamed himself for not catching it sooner, and Emily was furious that we hadn't taken more precautions. Following the Jake incident, things became tense. We were still successful, still earning money. However, the cracks in our relationships were beginning to show. Aaron became more distant, devoting himself to work and taking on more responsibility than ever. Emily became more controlling, attempting to oversee every aspect of the business to ensure that nothing fell through the cracks. Carlos, the eternal peacekeeper, tried to keep everything together. But it wasn't easy. As for me, I was caught in the middle, trying to keep the company running while also dealing with my personal demons. As we became more successful, I found myself thinking more about my parents and the life I had left behind. I had always told myself that I was not like them, that I was superior to them. But sometimes I wondered if it was true. I was making money. Sure. But at what cost? I barely had time for anything other than work, and the stress of running the business was beginning to take its toll. Then came the next shock. We've been planning our biggest event at the Vault yet. It was a corporate gala for one of the city's largest technology companies, and it was expected to generate more revenue than any other event we'd ever hosted. We were all excited and nervous. Everything needed to go perfectly. Things went well the night of the event until about halfway through. There was a power outage. The whole venue went dark and chaos ensued. Guests were panicking, drinks were spilling, and it was a total disaster. We were able to restore power after about 20 minutes, but the damage was already done. The technology company was furious. They demanded a full refund, threatened to sue, and spread the word that we were an untrustworthy company. It was a nightmare. We'd never had an event go so disastrously wrong, and it hit us hard. Our reputation suffered significantly, and we lost several clients as a result. This was a wake-up call. We been riding high for so long that we began to believe we were invincible. But the truth was that we were still figuring things out as we went, and a single mistake could bring everything crashing down. Following the gala disaster, tensions within our group reached an all-time high. Aaron accused Emily of micromanaging the event. Emily blamed Aaron for not planning for contingencies, and Carlos and I were caught in the middle, attempting to keep the peace. We felt like we were about to fall apart, but we managed to pull through. We spent months rebuilding our reputation, regaining clients, and correcting past mistakes. It wasn't easy, and there were times when I seriously considered leaving it all, but I couldn't. This company and the life we created were all I had. I was not going to give up on it so easily. Now, a few years later, we are still standing. We've been through more storms than I can count, and we've emerged stronger on the other side. Our company is thriving, and we are earning more money than we ever imagined possible. However, the road to success has not been easy, and it has required a number of sacrifices. I have learned a lot along the way. I've realized that success is more than just making money. It's about who you surround yourself with, what decisions you make, and how willing you are to take risks. I've learned that no matter how far you run, the past will eventually catch up with you. And I've discovered that sometimes the people you trust the most are the ones who can harm you the most. But, despite the difficulties and setbacks, I would not trade this journey for anything. I'm proud of what we've accomplished, as well as the person I've grown into. Following the disaster at the corporate gala and the near collapse of our business, we worked tirelessly to rebuild. We slowly regained our footing, the vault. Our venue regained popularity, and we began to book major events on a regular basis. The company was expanding, and the four of us, me, Aaron, Emily, and Carlos, had found a way to work through the tension. It wasn't always easy, but we got back on track and stronger than before. The situation was finally improving. I was beginning to believe that, just maybe, I had truly escaped from my past. But as fate would have it, the ghosts I thought I'd left behind were not finished with me. It all began one cold Wednesday morning. I was sitting in my vault office reviewing financial reports when I received a call from the front desk. "Matt," the receptionist replied, her voice hesitant. "There are 2 people here who want to see you. They said they were your parents." My heart dropped to my stomach. My parents? I hadn't spoken with them in years, not since I moved to the city from my hometown. They were still living in the small, miserable town where I grew up, as far as I knew. What the hell were they doing here? In my office. I instructed the receptionist to send them up, and I waited, my thoughts racing. What could they want? The last time we talked, my father had told me that I would never amount to anything, that I would crawl back, begging for his assistance, and here they were, at the pinnacle of my success. A few minutes later, the door swung open, revealing Rick and Janet, my parents. They had not changed much. My father still wore a permanent scowl, his thick arms crossed over his chest as he walked into the room, as if he owned it. My mother followed behind him. Her face was pinched and sour, exactly as I remembered. "Well, look at you," my father said, his voice dripping with sarcasm as he looked around my office. "All grown up, you have a nice little place here." I did not say anything. I just stared at them, waiting for whatever bullshit they had come to throw at me. My mother finally spoke, her tone cold and sharp. "We heard you did well for yourself. Finally make something out of your life." "Yeah," I answered, my voice stiff. "I worked hard for everything I have. What do you want?" My dad snorted. "What do we want? Is that any way to communicate with your parents after all these years? I think you made it clear a long time ago that you didn't care about me, so let's cut the crap. Why are you here?" After a pause, my father's eyes narrowed as he leaned forward, placing his hands on my desk. "We're here because we deserve what's ours." "What exactly are you talking about?" I inquired, genuinely perplexed. "You didn't build this company on your own, boy," he growled. "You may have left, but you still owe us. Your success is built on the foundation we provided you. I worked hard to provide for you. We made sacrifices." I looked at him in disbelief. "Do you believe you are entitled to my company? Are you serious now?" My mother, always the quieter manipulator, finally spoke up. "We gave you life, Matthew. Everything you are, everything you have accomplished. It is because of us. We deserve our share and we've come to get it." I was stunned. I expected them to do something, but demanding a piece of my company after everything they had put me through was unexpected. It was completely insane. "You've got to be kidding me," I replied, shaking my head. "You two did not help me build any of this. I got here on my own despite you. This is not because of you." My father's face darkened. "We gave you the strength to survive. We're the reason you got this far. You did not give me anything." "But trauma," I shot back, my rage growing. "I'm not giving you a single penny of my earnings. Now get out of my office." My mother's eyes narrowed, and for a brief moment I could see the rage simmering beneath her cold exterior. But my father spoke next. His voice was low and menacing. "If you do not turn over what is ours, we will take it from you, one way or another." I stood up. My heart is pounding in my chest. You can try, but I'm sure you'll regret it. My dad sneered. Clearly enjoys the confrontation. We'll see about it. You have 24 hours to reconsider, or we'll bring your little empire crashing down. With that, they turned and left, leaving me standing there, furious. How dare they enter my life after so many years and demand something that was not theirs to take? I knew my parents were manipulative and cruel, but this was a new low, even for them. I spent the rest of the day trying to concentrate on work, but my thoughts kept returning to the confrontation. What were their plans? How far will they go? I knew they were cruel enough to try something drastic. I wasn't the same scared, broken kid anymore. The following day, I attempted to put the encounter behind me. We had a big event coming up, our friend Emily's wedding. Emily had been planning this wedding for months, and everything was going to be perfect. We had rented out the vault for the occasion, and I was thrilled to finally have a day to celebrate something positive. But, as I should have expected, nothing went as planned. I arrived at the vault. The decorators were there to arrange flowers and set up at least until I received a frantic call from one of the staff. Matt, you should come down here right now. She spoke in a panicked tone. Something has happened. My heart sank and I rushed downstairs, dread welling up in my stomach. As soon as I stepped into the main hall, my worst fears were confirmed. Tables were turned over, flowers were ripped apart, and some of the antique decorations. It appeared that a tornado had ripped through the place. What the hell happened? I inquired, my voice barely above a whisper as I assessed the damage. Greg, a young staff member, came running up to me, terrified. I do not know. We went out for a few minutes to get coffee, and I was about to respond when I noticed something that made my blood run cold. A familiar object could be found among the wreckage on one of the broken tables. A package of cigars. Not just any cigars, but my brand for as long as I can remember. They had been here. It did not take long to confirm my suspicions. I accessed the security footage from the cameras we installed in the vault. Sure enough, my parents broke into the venue in the early hours of the morning and destroyed everything in sight. My father was the one flipping tables and smashing decorations, while my mother stood by, expression on her face. I was filled with rage. Everything we had worked so hard to build. It wasn't just about ruining Emily's wedding, this was personal. This was their way of demonstrating that they could still control me, that they could still infiltrate my life and destroy everything I valued. But they'd underestimated me. I was no longer the scared, submissive child they had raised. I wasn't going to be bullied into submission. This time I was prepared to fight back. First thing I did was call Emily. I explained what happened. I embracing myself for her reaction, but she handled it better than I expected. Are you serious? She inquired, sounding more incredulous than angry. Your parents did it. I'm very sorry, Emily. I honestly don't know what to say. She remained quiet for a moment before sighing. It sucks, but I'm not going to let them ruin my day. We will figure something out. We always do. Her calm demeanor helped relieve the knot in my chest, but I wasn't going to let my parents get away with it. Not this time. The next step was to call the police. They arrived, took a report, and reviewed the security footage. There was no doubt about who was responsible. My parents were eventually arrested for vandalism and property destruction, but it wasn't enough. I wasn't going to let them get away with a slap on the wrist. I wanted them to feel the consequences of their actions, to understand that they couldn't just walk back into my life and tear everything apart with no consequences. So I did something I never expected myself to do. I filed a lawsuit. It wasn't only about the money. Although the vault suffered extensive damage, the issue was one of principle. For years, they treated me as if I were nothing. I felt like I owed them my life just because they were my parents. This was my chance to stand up for myself and prove that I was no longer going to be their punching bag. The lawsuit dragged on for several months. My parents initially denied everything, claiming that the security footage was doctored. That was all a misunderstanding. However, the evidence was overwhelming. With the footage, fingerprints, and witness statements from staff who had seen them leave the scene, there was no way they could get out of it. The court case was one of the most stressful events in my life. It was infuriating to sit in that courtroom and listen to my parents lie through their teeth, trying to paint themselves as the victims. But I maintained my cool. I had an excellent lawyer, and I knew we had the truth on our side. One of the most shocking moments occurred when my father took the stand. I expected him to be defiant, sticking to his story and denying everything. Instead, he cracked under cross-examination. He finally admitted what he had done, claiming that he was angry and felt entitled to what I had built because the courtroom, however, knew that his excuses were weak and that he lacked a legitimate defense for his actions. My mother, on the other hand, declined to accept any responsibility. She stuck to her story, saying she had nothing to do with the vandalism and was only there to talk to me. But the evidence against in the end, the jury did not buy it. We won the case. My parents were ordered to pay for the damages, which totaled a large sum, and they were prohibited from approaching me or the vault. It legally, but personally. For the first time in my life, I felt as if I had of my own destiny. But the victory was bittersweet. Winning the case did not alleviate the years of trauma. They left behind emotional scars. And it didn't change the fact that they remained my parents weren't. After the trial, I cut off all communication with them. I blocked their phone numbers, deleted their emails, and made it clear that I wanted nothing to do with them ever again. It was difficult at first, especially when my mother wrote letters pleading for forgiveness, claiming that she had changed and knew better than to believe her lies. As for the company, we recovered from the vandalism. The vault was repaired. Emily's wedding was rescheduled and went off without incident. We made an impression on all of us. It was a reminder that no matter catch up with you, that I quote, "V learned a lot from this entire experience. I've learned that family isn't defined by blood, and that the people who are supposed to love you the most can also hurt you the most. But I've also discovered that I'm stronger than I ever thought. I outlived my parents, and I emerged from the other side stronger. So that is where I am currently, running a successful business, surrounded by friends who are more like family than my biological family ever was." Grip of my past. It has not been easy, and I'm aware that there are still challenges ahead. But for the first time in my life, I feel in control of my own destiny.